I never liked changing routines. They were the one thing that kept me anchored, especially in a city that never quite felt like mine. After moving to Hawthorne Ridge for work, I found myself clinging to the smallest consistencies: morning coffee from the same corner cafe, evening walks along Maple Street, and, most importantly, my workouts at Ridgepoint Gym 5 days a week. It wasn't just about staying fit. It was a space where my thoughts could slow down, where I didn't have to speak, smile, or explain myself. In a place full of noise, the repetition of lifting, breathing, and counting reps was its own kind of peace. I never expected the gym to be anything more than a place to sweat and go home. Until he showed up. At first, he was just a blur in my peripheral vision. He came in late afternoon, around the same time I did. Tall, built like someone who didn't try too hard but always looked like he knew what he was doing. His dark bronze skin glistened under the overhead lights, and he wore a navy hoodie with the sleeves pushed up. There was a steadiness to the way he moved, not cocky but confident, like someone who understood their body and trusted it. I noticed him more than I wanted to admit. I don't even know why. It wasn't just that he was attractive, though he definitely was. It was something quieter. Something about how he looked people in the eye when they walked past. How he nodded at the front desk guy, every time without fail. Like he saw people really saw them. And in a place where everyone kept their heads down and headphones in, that stuck out. Still, I didn't let my eyes linger too long. I wasn't sure what kind of attention was safe around here, and I'd worked too hard to get comfortable in my own skin to risk peeling it back for nothing. Then came the day it all shifted. It was a Wednesday. My least favorite day of the week. Halfway to the weekend, halfway to nowhere. I was mid-set on the bench press when I misjudged the weight. Just enough to throw off my balance, and the bar dipped lower than I expected. I caught it, barely, but my arms were already shaking. Before I could blink, a pair of hands steadied the bar above me. "You good?" A voice asked low, steady. I nodded, breath caught somewhere in my throat. He helped guide the bar back onto the rack, then stepped back just enough to give me space. "Yeah, just miscalculated," I said, sitting up, my face already flushing. "Don't sweat it. Happens to everyone."
He smiled then.
Real smile, soft and wide. "You usually train solo?" "Yeah," I said, trying not to sound offensive. "I'm Derrick," he said, wiping his hands with a towel. "I usually spot for my cousin, but he's been skipping lately. Guess I owe him for making me solo today." "Jesse," I replied, offering my hand. He took it without hesitation. After that, things got blurry in a way that felt strangely significant. Not dramatic, no music swelled, no spark leapt between us. But something shifted. Something small but permanent. Like the first loose thread that, when pulled, unravels an entire seam. We didn't talk long that day. A few words, a laugh or two, a shared nod when we crossed paths between machines. But later that night, lying in bed, I found myself replaying the moment over and over. The calm in his voice, the steadiness in his hands, the way he looked at me like I was just a person, not someone to figure out, not a riddle to solve. Just Jesse. The next day, I noticed him again. This time he waved. The day after that, he waved and walked over. We started working in together on a few machines. Nothing serious. No labels. Just two guys lifting weights and making small talk. I learned he was originally from Boulder, Colorado. Moved to Hawthorne Ridge a few months before I did. Worked in construction management. Liked jazz. Disliked traffic. Had a scar on his knee from falling off his bike as a kid. I told him about my job at the marketing agency, how I mostly worked behind the scenes. How I preferred nights over mornings, black coffee over sweet cream, and music without lyrics. He didn't pry. Just listened, nodded, occasionally smiled like he understood more than I was saying. I found myself watching the clock during the workday, counting down the hours until I could go to the gym. Not to lift. Not really. I just wanted to see if he'd be there. If he'd spot me again. If he'd say my name the way he had, like it mattered. It was subtle, all of it. No grand gestures, no sudden revelations. Just quiet moments stacked on top of each other until they felt like something more. And yet, part of me didn't know what to do with it. with him, with the possibility of something real. I'd been careful for so long. Careful not to expect too much. Careful not to read into things. Careful not to want. But the thing about careful is it doesn't protect you from wanting. It just makes you better at pretending you don't. That Friday, as I packed up my gym bag, I caught myself in the mirror. Something was different. Not in how I looked, but in how I saw myself. Like I was on the edge of something, change, risk, maybe even connection. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of the fall. What I didn't know was that Derrick was about to change everything. And it would start not with a question, but with something he did without saying a word. Derrick became a part of my days the way a melody sneaks into your head. You don't notice it at first, then suddenly, it's everywhere. He'd show up at the gym just after 5, right when the sky started folding into dusk and the fluorescent lights overhead lost their harshness. We never made plans, never sent messages. Yet somehow, we ended up arriving around the same time. I started to think it wasn't a coincidence. But I never asked. There was a rhythm to our unspoken agreement. Some days, we'd nod and go about our separate routines. Other days, we'd spot each other on heavier lifts or chat during rest sets. It felt natural, easy. And that ease was dangerous because it made me lower my guard without realizing it. It wasn't just about lifting anymore. Derrick had a way of asking questions that didn't feel like questions. He'd mention something I said the day before, my favorite album, a line from a book, and then somehow turn it into a conversation about everything else, family, ambition, the things we feared saying out loud. He never pushed. He just listened. And that was new for me. He told me about his dad, a man who once believed in discipline more than softness. About his younger sister, who came out before he did and paved a silent path for him to walk years later. About his ex, whom he rarely mentioned, except once, late in a quiet evening stretch when he said, "I think we loved each other's potential more than each other." I wasn't used to people being that open. Especially not men. Especially not here. I found myself speaking more, too. Telling him about my mother, who never quite asked if I was gay, but always set an extra place at the table, just in case I brought someone. About the first boy I liked in high school and how I buried the feeling so deep it took years to unearth. About how I still wore masks around certain people depending on the room, the street, the state. He never judged. Never rushed me. Sometimes he'd nod. Other times he'd just let silence be silence. It was the kind of silence I didn't want to run from. But even in that comfort, a tension started to form, thin and invisible, like static in the air before a storm. It wasn't uncomfortable, just charged. One evening, we were working out near the back wall doing cable flies. I'd finished my set and was standing there, wiping sweat from my forehead, when I caught him looking at me. Not in a lingering, obvious way. Just long enough for it to register, like a sentence that hangs in the air waiting for someone to finish it. Our eyes met. He didn't look away. Neither did I. There was no smile. No smirk. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted between us, and we both knew it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about how close he had stood, how his laugh had felt warmer than usual. My brain tried to logic it away. Maybe he was just friendly. Maybe I was misreading things. Maybe I was projecting. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something real was beginning to grow between us, and it scared me how much I wanted it. The following week, it all intensified. We didn't touch, not really, but proximity became its own language. Standing a little closer, sitting on the bench after sets longer than we needed to, laughing at jokes that weren't that funny just to make each other laugh more. A shared water bottle once. A hand brushing past mine on accident, and neither of us pulling away. Still, neither of us said anything that made it clear. No one named it. And maybe that was the conflict growing inside me, this constant dance between knowing and fearing, between possibility and restraint. I wanted him to say something, but I was terrified he would. Because if he said it, it would be real. And if it was real, I couldn't pretend it wasn't happening anymore. One afternoon, as we walked out of the gym together, the sky bleeding gold behind the buildings, he asked if I wanted to grab a smoothie. It wasn't a date. Or maybe it was. I didn't ask. I just said yes. We sat in a quiet corner of the smoothie bar, sipping peanut butter protein blends and talking about music. At one point, he leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. You ever feel like you're holding back something so long, it starts to feel like part of you? I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. He looked at me, really looked at me, and something passed between us. Heaviness, hope, history. Maybe even a question. I used to, I said finally. Not sure if I am anymore.
He nodded.
Didn't press. Just reached across the table and tapped his knuckles lightly against mine. It was the smallest touch, and yet it echoed louder than anything either of us had said. As we left and walked back to our cars, something unspoken hung between us like a fragile thread. Not fragile in a weak way, but in the way that made you want to be careful with it. Respectful. Like this wasn't a game or a crush. Like it could become something if we let it. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. My heart was quieter than usual. Not racing. Not anxious.
Just awake.
I didn't know where this was going. I didn't even know if I was ready. But I knew this. Derrick had stopped being just a part of my routine. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't scared of what that meant. There was a comfort in how we started folding into each other's lives. Slow, almost imperceptible. It was in the way Derrick would text me now and then with nothing more than a song link or a meme that made me laugh out loud on the bus ride home. It was in how I found myself grabbing an extra energy bar for him when I stopped by the convenience store before a workout. No confessions, no declarations. Just a deepening of the space we shared. We began working out together more deliberately. He adjusted my form, corrected my posture with gentle touches, one hand at my lower back, the other at my elbow. I'd feel the heat of his skin through the fabric of my shirt, and my focus would blur for a heartbeat before I forced my mind back into the rep. He never made it weird. If he noticed the shift in my breath, he didn't say anything. But I think he knew. And I think I knew that he knew. Outside the gym, things began to change too. He invited me to join him on a Saturday morning run, and though I wasn't a runner, I went. We jogged along the river trail, the path dappled with leaves and low sunlight. He set a slow pace, just enough to talk. He asked about my childhood. I told him about the small town I grew up in, where everyone knew everyone, and I never quite figured out who I was allowed to be. He shared stories of camping trips with his cousins, the nights they'd sneak out to the lake and talk about everything and nothing under a sky full of stars. We stopped to rest near a bench, overlooking the water. Derrick stretched his arms behind his head, exhaling like someone letting go of something unseen. You ever think about how different life would be if you'd just spoken up sooner? He asked. I didn't answer right away. The river moved quietly beside us. All the time, I finally said. That moment lingered. We didn't need to spell it out. We were both men who'd lived quietly for a long time. Maybe too long. Later that week, I ran into him at the gym locker room, both of us arriving late after long days. We exchanged tired smiles, joked about skipping leg day, and then, without any real plan, we ended up outside the building, leaning against the back wall under the soft buzz of a street lamp. I almost didn't come tonight, he said, eyes fixed on the empty parking lot. Me either, I admitted. He turned to face me. Glad I did. I met his gaze, heart thudding in the quiet.
Yeah.
Me too. Something shifted in the air, something more than what had been shifting before. It wasn't flirtation anymore. It wasn't subtext. It was something unspoken, but entirely understood. He looked like he wanted to say something.
So did I.
But neither of us did. Instead, he nudged my shoulder lightly with his. You hungry? I nodded. Always. We grabbed takeout from a Thai place a few blocks away and sat in his truck, eating out of paper cartons with chopsticks. The cab smelled of basil and lemongrass, and soft jazz hummed through the speakers. This is my favorite spot, he said, chewing thoughtfully. They always give extra spring rolls if you compliment their cat. I grinned. You sweet-talk restaurant pets now. Only the ones with good taste. That night wasn't a date, but it wasn't not a date either. When he dropped me off, We sat in the parked car for a few extra minutes, neither of us in a rush to say goodbye. I opened the door first, and just as I stepped out, he said my name. Jesse. I turned. I like being around you, he said. Just wanted to say that. My chest tightened. I managed a small smile. I like being around you too. I walked to my apartment with something new humming under my skin. It wasn't fireworks or lightning bolts. It was steadier, deeper. The feeling of being seen, of being chosen, slowly and with care. But beneath that warmth was something else, a sliver of fear I couldn't ignore. I'd spent so long keeping walls up, managing people's expectations, calibrating how much of myself I let into the world. And here was someone steadily pulling me out into the open. Not forcefully, just by standing still and waiting for me to step forward. The next day, I told my best friend, Rena, about Derrick. We were sitting on my balcony, the city humming below us. She held her tea between both hands and raised an eyebrow when I finally said the words. I think I'm falling for someone. She didn't flinch, just sipped her tea and waited. His name's Derrick, I added, almost like a confession. Rena smiled. You've been talking about him for weeks without realizing it. Yeah, I said, a little surprised.
Yeah, she nodded.
It's in your face. In your voice. You're different when you talk about him. Softer. I looked down at my hands, unsure what to do with the vulnerability pressing against my ribs. Have you told him? She asked.
No.
Not directly. Well, she said, tapping her cup, maybe it's time. That night, as I lay in bed, Derrick's words echoed in my head. I like being around you. And I realized that all this time, I'd been waiting for the right moment, the perfect signal. But maybe moments don't come pre-labeled. Maybe they become the right one when you decide not to waste them. I picked up my phone and typed a message. Dinner this weekend? Just us. No gym. My treat. I stared at it for a second, thumb hovering over the send button. Then I hit send and set the phone down before I could overthink it. Seconds later, it buzzed. You read my mind. I'm in. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew this much. Something real was beginning. And for once, I wasn't going to run from it. Saturday arrived with an odd stillness, like the world had taken a breath and was holding it. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, not because Derrick would be seeing it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. Nervous energy buzzed just under my skin, and for once, it wasn't from caffeine or pre-workout. We had decided on a small place downtown, a quiet bistro known more for its mood than its menu. I'd made the reservation days ago, double-checked it 3 times, and still showed up 10 minutes early. I sat at our table by the window, watching the sidewalk traffic and trying not to overanalyze every beat of my pulse. He arrived right on time, dressed more casually than I expected, dark jeans, a soft gray button-up with the sleeves rolled. He smiled when he saw me, that same half-smile I'd come to recognize, the one that made something in my chest shift. Hey, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Hey. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then we both laughed almost at the same time. The ice was already melting. Dinner flowed easier than I thought it would. We talked about work, the music we'd been into lately, the books piling up on our nightstands. I told him about the time I accidentally signed up for an advanced yoga class and nearly passed out trying to impress a date. He confessed he once got stuck in a climbing gym harness because he didn't read the directions properly. There were no walls between us tonight. Just 2 men who had stopped pretending they weren't hoping for something more. After dinner, we walked. Neither of us said it, but neither of us was ready for the evening to end. The streets were mostly empty, quiet but not silent. We passed storefronts with lights dimmed low and couples sharing ice cream under neon signs. Everything felt softer than usual, like the world had taken a step back to make room for us. Derrick stopped walking when we reached a small park bench beneath an old oak tree. Without a word, we sat. He leaned back, legs stretched out, head tilted up at the sky. I used to come here in college, he said. Back when I wasn't sure who I was yet. I'd sit here and watch people go by and wonder what it would be like to just exist without hiding. I looked at him. And now, He turned toward me. Now I'm wondering if I ever stopped hiding, or if I just got better at it. His honesty was a mirror I hadn't asked to look into, but there it was. I understood him more than I could say. I think I'm still learning what it means to stop hiding, I said. Some days I think I've got it. Other days, I still check myself in reflections, wondering if I look too much or not enough. He reached over then, not dramatically, not in some grand, movie-perfect moment, but gently. His hand found mine and settled there, firm and warm. I don't want to hide around you, he said. The words hit me like a pulse. Simple.
Certain.
Unafraid. I didn't speak right away. I didn't have to. My fingers curled into his, and I nodded slowly. Me neither. We sat like that for a long while, saying nothing, saying everything. Eventually, he walked me home. The streets had quieted even more, and the city felt like it belonged to us. At my door, we paused. This was good, he said, stepping just a little closer. It was. I agreed, my voice quieter now. He leaned in, not abruptly, not hesitantly either. Just close enough to see if I'd meet him there. I did. The kiss wasn't hurried. It wasn't cautious. It was steady and grounding, like a promise passed between two people who'd waited long enough to know what they were choosing. When we pulled apart, we didn't say anything right away. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full. Come inside, I asked, almost a whisper. He looked at me for a moment, searching, then nodded once. But even then, it wasn't about rushing forward. We spent the rest of the evening curled on the couch, knees brushing, a movie playing in the background that neither of us paid attention to. We talked until the moon climbed high. About fear. About being seen. About how long it took to arrive at a place where we could look at someone and not flinch from what we felt. And somewhere in all of it, something shifted again. Quietly, like the tide rolling in unnoticed until your feet are wet and you realize the whole shore has changed. It wasn't that everything was settled now, or that our story had reached its climax. It was that we had finally stepped into the same chapter together, no longer reading ahead in secret. By the time he left that night, we hadn't made any promises. But we didn't need to. The connection between us was no longer something we tiptoed around. It was real, and it was only just beginning.